Hello and welcome back to the Fruit of Grisaia, Amane's route. In the last episode, the girls experienced the first day without actual rations and had to deal with starvation, with the first day of actual starvation. We also had a bonding moment between Kazuki and Amane, as Amane broke down thinking about her family, in which Kazuki comforted her and told her that she wanted to return to be able to help raise her brother, Yuji. Let's continue. The fifth day in the valley. Let's begin from the conclusion. Today it rained all day long. To be honest, I had no idea rain could be this unpleasant. The constant drumming of water against the tent was unexpectedly loud, enough to make conversation difficult, and the light entering the tent was far dimmer than usual. Thanks to my strong astigmatism, everything seemed fuzzy and indistinct, so it was extremely difficult to do much of anything. But the bigger problem was the rainwater that oozed up from the ground beneath us and the damp chill it brought. This morning I woke to a real double whammy: the psychological jolt of emerging from a familiar nightmare and the physical pain of a throbbing headache. I had piled 2 mats under my sleeping bag last night, but when I came to I was soaking wet. My body temperature had fallen as I slept, and the chilled blood running through my veins numbed the blood vessels in my brain. Even after waking, my calorie-starved body struggled to warm itself. My teeth chattering uncontrollably in my mouth, I stared reproachfully up through the tent at the merciless sky. I'm so cold, Kazuki. Changing out of my wet clothes might have helped matters somewhat, if my spare outfit hadn't been soaked through as well. I hit on the idea of a hot drink after a few minutes, but it was pouring outside the tent. Starting a fire would have been difficult, and more importantly, the fierce sound of rain striking against the canvas had thoroughly drained me of the willpower to even poke my head outside. Want another cup of onion tea? Apparently unable to just sit back and watch, Kazuki had ventured out in the midst of the downpour for my sake, bringing back boiling water for our onion skin extract beverage. The stuff was never really worthy of the name tea, but by now we'd let those same skins seep so many times it was little more than faintly yellow water. Of course, I was plenty happy to have even that, and Kazuki's act of mercy contrasted so strongly with my own cowardice that I felt about ready to cry with gratitude. But when I glanced over at her sitting there, her wet hair matted like a stray dog's coat, I couldn't exactly fire off a casual "sure, a refill would be nice." My hand still gripping the empty cup, I slowly shook my head. This storm is awful. Yes, indeed, there was quite a lot of loud thunder just before dawn, although it seems it wasn't enough to wake you up. Well, I guess I was vaguely aware of some loud sounds, but yeah. Even when the roars jolted me awake for a moment, my listlessness quickly overwhelmed me again. I simply didn't have the energy to wake up that early. Immediately after the fall, I'd been unable to sleep through the night. As I dozed lightly with frequent interruptions, the morning often seemed to sneak up on me before I knew it. But lately that had changed dramatically. Once I managed to doze off, it was very difficult to wake up. More and more, falling asleep felt like sinking into a thick bed of mud. I guess I'm just tired. I think you're exhausted emotionally more than physically. Also, the biggest factor is that you're simply beginning to grow used to this place. When you're sleeping in an environment that's both harsh and unfamiliar, your unconscious mind is not only processing memories, but also maintaining a vigilant awareness of your surroundings. Your eyes will spring open at the smallest sound. That sounded plausible now that you mentioned it. The first few days sleeping in the tent, the stirring of a neighbor next door would be enough to jerk me awake, and my eyes would open automatically at the first light of dawn. In that respect, Kasami Kazuki was an ideal tent mate. Once asleep, she'd lie so still in her bag I sometimes was half worried she'd suddenly died in there. I never once heard her snore or grunt in her sleep. Lately, Kazuki had been sleeping on a very regular schedule. We'd start preparations for dinner at 6:30 p.m. and finish our meal by 7 p.m. Or what passed for a meal at this point, at least. By 8, I'd noticed her stifling small yawns, and around 9 she'd come out and declare herself sleepy. At 10 she would crawl into our tent, cheerfully spread out her sleeping bag, take off her uniform and leave it neatly folded at her bedside. At the instant her head hit the rucksack she used for a pillow, she'd exhale noisily just once and go silent. Within 10 seconds I'd hear the soft regular breathing that indicated she'd fallen asleep. Of course I couldn't flip the switch to sleep mode quite so easily or on such a predictable schedule. My conversational partner lost, I had very little to do with myself late at night. So until I managed to fall asleep, I'd stave off boredom by staring at Kazuki's sleeping face. After a few minutes in dreamland, she'd occasionally make faces in her sleep, most often furrowing her brow in a caricature of a troubled thought, sometimes smiling dopily at nothing in particular. Hey Kazuki, do you have dreams? Let's see, when I grow up I'd like to be a nurse or a florist. Running a little pastry shop would be lovely as well. That's not what I'm talking about. And in the first place, what's with the half-assed attempt at pretending you're some run-of-the-mill girl with cute little dreams? Forget being a nurse, you're much better suited to be the role of a black market surgeon with tattered old doctor's robe. Florist? Cupcake peddler? Try con artist, maybe the founder of some sketchy cult. Ah, so by dreams you're referring to the ones we see while asleep. Of course, I dream in that sense as well. What sort of dreams do you have? Today I found myself reliving a moment from soon after I entered our school, when I was somewhat bewildered by the confusing self-service system in the cafeteria. To me, such dislocated memories of the past seem to be the most frequent. I can't say I have many of the more symbolic flying through the sky variety. No kidding, lately I've been having a lot of dreams where I fall from a high place. I've had dreams of the sort ever since I was a child. Most often I'm falling from the top of a cliff. As the ground beneath my feet crumbles to nothing and I plunge downward, I stare in quiet composure at the earth far below. My thoughts are oddly calm. Guess I'm going to land right about there. And as long as I keep that detached perspective, I never seem to hit the ground. But eventually it occurs to me that I'm dreaming. In the next moment I slam into the earth and jerk awake in my bed, my whole body rigid with shock. What might a dream like that signify? Kazuki's answer was brief. It means you're uneasy. Other than falling, my most common dream was probably of the running variety. This very morning I had found myself fleeing some vaguely defined but menacing pursuers. A countless number of black shadows hot on my heels, I was pushing my way desperately forward through oily thick air, dragging my strangely heavy legs along the ground. The illusion was unusually persistent. Even when I realized it was a dream, it kept its hold on me. Just as I began to beg myself to wake up, my eyes had slowly opened to the sensation of that throbbing headache. I turned on my cell phone briefly to check the time. Apparently it was already past 2 p.m. The rain was still hammering fiercely down. By now the tent was half submerged in muddy water. There was nothing to do but curl myself up in my heavy wet uniform, rubbing my arms and trembling from the cold. Although I was doing nothing at all, my stomach was still growling, and although my stomach was growling, it was still raining outside. Thinking of the time it would take to start a cooking fire, I lost all motivation to try. What were the other girls doing right now? I took a quick glance out the entrance of the tent, but there didn't seem to be anyone moving through the downpour. They must have all been quietly enduring the storm in their tents. The steady drumming of the rain was the only sound I could hear. The cries of the cicadas, so vigorous and persistent when the weather was clear, were utterly gone. So too the eerie shrieks of the unseen birds hidden in the treetops above. Kazuki? Suddenly wanting to hear another human voice, I called Kazuki's name. There was no response. When I looked over, I found Kazuki sitting on her sleeping mat just as before, but at some point her eyes had fallen closed. Ah, right, it's 2 o'clock. Every day, Kazuki would take a nap sometime between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. It was never more than a quick 15-minute doze, so the first few times I thought she'd just nodded off out of exhaustion. But it happened every day at roughly the same time, so it soon became obvious this little siesta was part of her schedule. You don't have to sleep sitting up, you know. Nobody's going to complain if you lie down like a normal person. Of course, considering the minor flood we had going on in here, that probably wouldn't be much more relaxing option at this point. This was a grave problem indeed. We had to think of a countermeasure of some sort before it happened again. But the damp floor isn't the only inconvenience brought on by the rain. For one thing, writing in this diary isn't easy when the pages are wet. And unfortunately, I've been in the grips of a much more serious dilemma for a little while now. Probably thanks to that big mug of onion tea this morning, I'm currently enduring a desperate need for a visit to the bathroom. The urge to pee was painfully intense, requiring constant effort to restrain. My pen trembled against the diary pages as I wrote. I surveyed the interior of the tent but found nothing that might serve as a makeshift umbrella or raincoat. When this rain lets up, I'm going straight to the captain and proposing we cobble together an outhouse with roof. I'm making a special note of that here so it can't possibly slip my mind. The sixth day in the valley. After a full day of unrelenting rain, we woke to a blessedly clear morning. Our life here has begun to assume something of a rhythm. Initially our mornings were a bit chaotic with people crawling out of their tents at random times, but recently everyone's been waking up by 6 a.m. at the latest, although it would be more accurate to say they are being forcibly woken up. Naturally, the one beating the stragglers out of bed is none other than my partner, Qa'Rajh Kazuki. Of course, that doesn't mean she literally goes around thrashing them. That would be much too inefficient. The recipient of her violence is the bottom of an anodized aluminum cooking pot. 15 minutes before the 6 a.m. wake-up call, Kazuki dangled the pot in question from a tree branch and began to wail away on the metal surface with a wooden sword she nicknamed the punishment rod, producing a piercing series of clangs. 15 minutes until morning muster. Then shouted a wake-up call in full military style. What's the deal with that punishment rod anyway? Sadly, it's nothing more than a crude wooden sword we use to split watermelons as part of our recreational activities at the camp, and when someone as tiny as Kazuki brandishes around, it looks less like a weapon and more like a prop for some corny slapstick routine. 10 minutes after that initial wake-up came the signal for folding hammocks. Apparently we are on an old-fashioned battleship now. After 5 minutes to roll up our sleeping bag and mat, the pod received another vigorous thrashing for the 6 a.m. muster. All hands line up in front of the tent for roll call. Obviously this is all pretty annoying, and at first there were a lot of complaints. But when forcibly informed that fixing a regular schedule or activity in order to reset your body's internal clock is the fundamental basis of a sound health maintenance plan, nobody had enough of a counter-argument to voice our open objections. And so every morning the entire group gathers obediently in a line for the daily physical. Or as the seniors refer to it behind our backs, Professor Kasami's tour of inspection. These health checkups amount to little more than a quick interview about any ailments, followed by any words of caution the doctor has to offer. But considering our isolation and general cluelessness, Kazuki's extensive knowledge has become something of a reassuring guidepost for many, so that this daily advice is fairly well received, for most part. As a comparison to an imperious doctor sweeping around the hospital might suggest, Kazuki has a retinue on these rounds. I tag along beside her from one patient to the next, taking notes in the memo pad we devoted to medical records. The summary I jot down at the end of the page doesn't change much from day to day. No major problems, given the circumstances. To rephrase, everyone's suffering from varying degrees of malnutrition, but they're not about to keel over and die today or tomorrow. After the general inspection, we turn our attention to those who suffered external injuries. That is, Kaneda and the cut on her forehead, as well as Sakurai and her lacerated abdomen. We perform what treatment we can, cleaning the crudely stitched wounds with a disinfectant made from wild herbs, then replacing their bandages with ones we washed clean and sterilized in boiling water. And finally, we stop by to visit Hiroka-san in the large tent to wipe the sweat from her feverish body. Well, this part is pretty much exclusively my job by now. When the morning rounds are finished at last, I seek out Mr. Ochi and report everyone's health acceptable, while Kazuki heads to Qa'Rajh Senpai's tent. The daily rations for each individual are being adjusted depending on the severity of their malnutrition symptoms as diagnosed by Kazuki. This distribution of the day's food, or as Kazuki now refers to it, chow time, is held at 7 a.m. Until then, everyone's supposed to take care of their laundry and air out their bedding. In particular, our sleeping bags have to be thoroughly dried in the sun on a regular basis, or they will be sprouting clumps of mold before we know it. After passing on the medical report, I return to our tent, grab Kazuki's bedding along with mine, then lay them out on top of the tent to dry. Finally, I head to the stream to take care of our combined laundry, then make my way to the captain's tent with our rice cooker to receive our daily rations. The routine started normally enough this morning, but at this final step we ran into our first serious breakdown in the process, one that will probably have lingering effects going forward. I arrived slightly early at the captain's tent, where she manages our entire food supply in cooperation with Mr. Ochi and her partner. Qa'Rajh was waiting inside as usual, but today her face was ghastly pale. What am I going to do? Huh? Did something happen? We're short one. What am I going to do? Short one? What are you talking about? The number of carrots. Qa'Rajh said, are you sure you didn't miscount? Why not check one more time? Carrots? As they explained the situation to me, there had been a total of 11 carrots carefully stocked away. On Captain Sakashida's orders, when that number fell to 10, they were planning to halt distribution and hold the rest in reserve. But when Qa'Rajh counted this morning, the 11th carrot they'd been intended to divide and hand out to the group was missing. So, starting today, we aren't getting any more carrots? That's not especially important right now. The problem lies in the fact that one of the carrots disappeared without explanation. Disappeared? Carrots don't have legs, so it didn't vanish on its own power, which would leave two plausible possibilities. Either she simply miscounted, or somebody ate it. It wasn't me! I didn't touch him, it's true! I can't stand carrots for one thing. Please rest assured, I'm not suggesting you're to blame. It's just that, if you didn't miscount, we're going to be faced with a far thornier dilemma. What do you mean? In all likelihood, the carrot was stolen. Therein lies the real problem. Stolen? By who? Exactly. That question is going to lead to a great deal of trouble. Conducting a criminal investigation in a claustrophobic situation like this would quickly give rise to widespread paranoia. To be honest, spiraling into disunity and mutual mistrust would be an absolute catastrophe for us under these circumstances. Everyone suspects everyone else, and is suspected in turn. That's never a pleasant feeling, and it rarely ends well. It certainly wouldn't help that our group was composed of half-starved teenage girls. If the criminal were discovered, there's no doubt she would have faced a vicious denunciation session. And if the investigation failed, it was all too obvious that rain of condemnation would fall instead of on Qa'Rajh for allowing this theft of our food supply to take place through her incompetence. So what can I do? Help me, Kasami-san. This wasn't my fault, right? I mean, I did just exactly what the captain told me to do. Calm yourself, Richan. Look, you can't call her that. She's older than you, isn't she? Since when were you childhood friends? Listen carefully, Qa'Rajh-san. Fortunately, the only people who currently know we've misplaced this carrot are the three of us and the thief who took it off our hands. In other words, I believe this won't come to light so long as we keep silent. Whoa, brushing the dirt under the rug? You're trying to make us all accessories to the crime. That's impossible. Mr. Ochi and the captain knew how many carrots we had left too. Even if we don't say anything, they'll find out eventually. It wasn't a proportionally large theft, but carrots are easy enough to count. Its disappearance would be all too obvious. In this situation, there are two solutions. Perhaps ways out would be the more appropriate term. There's a fun way and a boring way. Which would you like to hear? The fun way. No, how about you tell us both? Well then, I'll start with the fun plan. It's nice and simple too. Just blow this proverbial popsicle stand, grab all the remaining carrots and make a run for it. Run? Huh? Why? To where? When you get right down to it, your greatest fear about this whole affair is that you'll be severely scolded by the captain, yes? In that case, why not flee into the woods with all the carrots and try your luck at an escape attempt? If you're lucky enough to succeed and summon help, no one will blame you for taking a few carrots. Quite the contrary, I imagine you'll be viewed as a heroic savior, earning the perpetual adulation of all involved. That's your fun way? It does sound fun, doesn't it? No, it does not. Shucks. Shucks? Go shock yourself. Please take this seriously. Unless you help, Chiaki-san's absolutely going to kill me. Incidentally, what's the boring way? Well, it really is quite dull, you know. Little numerical alignment, nothing more. What's that supposed to mean? In short, there's no problem if we have the same number of carrots we did yesterday, correct? With those words, Kazuki picked up a kitchen knife and casually lopped off the tip of the nearest carrot. With quick, firm strokes, she sliced the carrots into pieces, then started right on the next one. What are you doing? Don't play around with our precious food. Just calm down and watch. See? Here we are, 11 carrots. Huh? When I looked down at the cutting board, the missing vegetable had somehow reappeared. I counted the sliced carrots again, slowly and carefully. There were 11 in total. What is this? 11? Huh? No way, there really are 11. This is bizarre. How did you do it? There's a rather famous puzzle that works on this principle. You're not familiar with it? If you cut a number of similar objects into sections and resort them, the total area seems to increase. Or oppositely, even after adding a piece to the area seems to stay constant. It's a very common spatial brain teaser. Now that you mention it, I think I might have seen a wooden puzzle like that in some souvenir shop. It was more likely some variety of Pantomino's puzzle. In any case, what I did this time is a much simpler trick. A careful glance should be enough to see that each carrot is missing a single section. If we had more carrots, the proportion taken from each would be smaller, so it would be harder to detect. Creepy! You're a witch! A witch, I say! Freaky! Very rude. If you're too uppity, I just might transform you into a mouse, you know? I don't care if you're a witch. Thank you, Kasami-san. I will repay you for this someday. That's quite alright, Richan. No need to worry yourself about that. I'm telling you, stop calling her that. You have no respect whatsoever for your elders, do you? Was Koide-senpai aware exactly what she just put herself in debt to? Even so, Kazuki said not to worry about it, so maybe a trick like that doesn't even register as a favor for her. Personally though, I thought her smile at that moment was saying, I don't expect you to be of much use to me anyway, and it sent a bit of a cold chill down my spine. Either way, I sure as heck didn't have the courage to ask Kazuki for clarification. And that's where we'll end this episode. So, there are eventful days and there are uneventful days. And we shall see what the next one will be in the next episode. But until then, take care.